Help give kids an extra life by donating today to help sick and injured children. Link in the description and pinned comment below.
Well, another year, another Capcom collection. I swear, Capcom's been really good with these. Just last month, the third Capcom Fighting Collection dropped, and it's only called Capcom Fighting Collection 2 because the second collection was the Marvel vs. Capcom collection. It's funny how Capcom Fighting Collection 2 was announced before the Marvel collection even released, but I guess Capcom loved how they turned Maximilian into a soprano for about a minute, so they did it again. And there's some real gems in this collection. And Capcom Fighting Evolution, but I guess they needed something to fill that last slot. Obviously, the highlight of this collection is the Capcom vs. SNK duology, but the point of QG at the arcade isn't only to cover the most obvious games. Heck, when the first Fighting Collection came out, I covered the most obscure title in the bunch. And one of the games in this collection, dos but actually tres, is Plasma Sword, Nightmare of Bilstein, which is actually a sequel to Capcom's first in-house developed 3D fighting game, Star Gladiator. Yeah, Capcom may be known for its 2D fighting prowess, but it's had some experience in the Z-axis as well. So today, we're gonna race into space and check out the sci-fi showdown known as Star Gladiator.
Hey, I might cover the CVS games another time. As a treat.
So, first things first. I mentioned that Star Gladiator was the first 3D fighting game that Capcom developed in-house. Previously, they had published the arcade version of Battle Arena Toshinden 2, but that game had been developed by Tamsoft, who developed the Toshinden series, but is better known nowadays for developing the Senran Kagura franchise. Quite a shift over the years, if I do say so myself. The original Battle Arena Toshinden was one of the first polygon-based 3D fighters, and the one that introduced a sidestepping mechanic into the genre. It was also credited as the first 3D weapons fighter, a year before Soul Edge would step onto the stage of history and completely overshadow its predecessors. As a matter of fact, the release of newer and better 3D fighters would relegate Battle Arena Toshinden to cult classic status, but not before it left its influence on games to come. I wouldn't be surprised if Capcom was taking notes from Toshinden 2 when developing Star Gladiator. But one influence that was more confirmed than implied is the one that Star Gladiator wears on its Durasteel sleeves. According to Seth Killian, Capcom's former senior community manager, in an interview with Destructoid, they were originally planning to make a Star Wars 3D fighting game. Imagine, a fighting game featuring characters like Luke, Han Solo, Darth Vader. That would have been the Wampa's niece. Oh wait, we eventually did get a Star Wars fighting game on PlayStation, and Masters of Terraskazi was a disaster rivaling the Rise of Skywalker. So whether Capcom lost the license for Star Wars or failed to secure it altogether, the devs decided instead to make their own sci-fi plot and put the new game together using the PS1-based ZN1 arcade hardware, which would make it easy to port later on. Star Gladiator Episode 1, Final Crusade, would release in arcades worldwide in July of 1996 with a home release on PlayStation literally months later. So let's pop a quarter in the slot and start this baby up! So I've already given you a brief rundown on the story. A literal space Nazi is set on conquering the galaxy, and standing in his way are a motley crew of warriors with plasma-powered weapons. The roster of the original game has a total of 12 characters, both base and hidden. Leading off for the good guys is Hayato Kanzaki, a bounty hunter who uses a plasma sword, and personality-wise is a bit of a cross between Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. Then there's June, a gymnastic fighter who uses a plasma ring in battle to avenge her father, who, unbeknownst to her, was captured and experimented on by Bilstein, resulting in the Saurian Rimgal. Then there's Saturn, an alien street performer who wields plasma yo-yos. Following up, we have Gamoth, who is essentially this game's Chewbacca. After his home planet's forests were devastated by a microbe, he becomes a bounty hunter alongside Hayato, fighting with a plasma axe. The Fourth Empire is led by Bilstein, a mix of Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine, who fights with a plasma broadsword and serves as the final boss. Not to mention he's the descendant of an actual in-universe Nazi, so that gives you even more reason to wreck his shit. He has several fighters serving under him, starting with Geralt, a fencer with a plasma rapier who was blackmailed by Bilstein, with his wife and daughter being held hostage and a bomb planted in his chest. Then there's Zelkin, a bird-like alien with a plasma claw and a serious grudge against humans, which he eventually gets over thanks to Hayato and company. Up next is Vector. No, not the Barian. This Vector is a robotic killing machine who uses a plasma gun. Finally, there's Bilstein's right-hand man, Gore, a vicious wizard who uses a plasma mace and is the game's sub-boss. There are also two hidden characters. The first is Kappa, and his name should give you an idea of what he looks like. He uses a plasma spear and lives for war and fighting, so he fits Bilstein's agenda like a glove. And the second hidden character is named Blood, who was captured and brainwashed by Bilstein as a child because of his potential for plasma power.
Yeah, it's pretty clear this game isn't exactly subtle about its references.
Now, as this was Capcom's first in-house 3D fighter, as well as a weapon-based fighter, the gameplay called for a different approach than the company's previous conventions. Instead of the Street Fighter layout of 3 punches and 3 kicks, this was a 4-button fighter consisting of buttons for horizontal and vertical slashes, a kick button, and a guard button. If this layout sounds familiar, that may be because the origin of another more famous weapon-based fighter that rhymes with Bull Wedge was released that same year. The meme word of this game is plasma. The central plasma power is more than a plot point, it's also the basis for the game's weapons and its combat system. For one, there are 2 different types of special guard moves called Plasma Reverses, which can turn the tide of battle. The Plasma Reflect is a parry move which can stun an opponent momentarily, while the Plasma Revenge lets you counter an enemy strike. On the offensive side, you have the Plasma Strike, a powerful blow which can only be used once per round, and the Plasma Combo system, which is used in place of a standard Super Combo gauge. By stringing together specific attack strings, you can keep a combo going even if your opponent blocks. Finishing a specific string with a specific input for each character unleashes the Plasma Final, a powerful combo finisher which can devastate an opponent. It's a strategic system that forces you to consider whether to continue your block string. Through the arcade mode, you fight against the entire main roster, culminating with a fight against Gore, and finally Bilstein himself. If you take too long to defeat Bilstein, you get a generic ending. If you want your character's true ending, you'll have to beat Bilstein within a certain time limit, 6 minutes in a standard best of 3, and then you'll have to defeat Super Bilstein on the astral plane. And you'll only have one shot to pull it off.
Hope you've been practicing!
When Star Gladiator was first released, the critical response was generally positive. Critics almost universally praised the game's character design and the variety in the fighting styles of the roster. The gameplay was also well regarded, and though it wasn't as deep as more well-known games like Tekken, it was still satisfying and intuitive. Movement felt great, and jumping didn't feel overly floaty, showing how 3D fighters had been progressing compared to earlier years. The game's presentation also really stood out, especially the 3D backgrounds. There's an interesting thing about the stages, by the way. While the order in which you fight the characters depends on who you're playing as and which faction you're representing, the order of the stages themselves is fixed. According to supplemental materials, the order of these stages represents the events of the story from a certain point of view, specifically Hayato's point of view. The stages progress from Hayato's training and graduation into the Star Gladiator program, and continue through the team's campaign against the Fourth Empire, culminating in Hayato's final battle against Bilstein at the top of his fortress. The tone of the stage themes also gradually changes accordingly. They start as upbeat techno, and then as you move into the campaign against the Fourth Empire, the music eventually reaches full-on space opera. That's a nice touch, not gonna lie. Both the arcade original and the PlayStation port of the game received high scores from critics, as well as being well received by fans, especially fans of Star Wars. Of course, it also faced stiff competition that year in the fighting genre. Tekken 2 came out that year, as well as Soul Edge and Virtua Fighter 3, so the market for fighting games was pretty crowded. Still, it managed to carve out a niche for itself, enough to be considered successful. At least, it was successful enough to warrant a sequel. In 1998, 2 years after Star Gladiator's release, Capcom released Plasma Sword, Nightmare of Bilstein. Why they changed the name of the game and the worldwide version of the game is beyond me, because not only is the Japanese title Star Gladiator 2 Nightmare of Bilstein, the game's intro explicitly refers to the game as Star Gladiator Episode 2. This sequel used the ZN2 hardware, which was an upgraded version of the ZN1, so you'd think that this would be ported to the PlayStation. Not the case. Instead, Plasma Sword would be ported to the Dreamcast in late 1999 in Japan, with international versions following the next year. So as far as the plot is concerned, it basically boils down to, somehow Bilstein returned. A year after the first game, rumors began circulating about Bilstein returning with a new cybernetic body, as well as reports of a ghost that eerily resembles Bilstein's old cybernetic body. Meanwhile, the Fourth Empire has rebuilt itself and seeks to finish what they started and conquer the universe.
Wait. Essence transfer? New bodies? Oh my god, Rise of Skywalker ripped off Plasma Sword!
So now the Star Gladiator crew heads off into battle once more, joined by some new allies, this time hoping to finish off Bilstein and the Fourth Empire for good. The only characters who got cut from the original roster were Kappa and Rimgal. Meanwhile, 14 new characters got added to the roster. Only 2 of them are completely unique though. The first is Rain, who is Bilstein's daughter who wields a plasma scythe. I won't ask who the mother was, but I can safely assume that said mother was a victim of Bilstein's twisted experiments. The other unique newcomer is Byakko, a white tiger-like alien ninja who fights using a plasma claw, who was hired to deal with the wildcards in the conflict. As for the remaining 12 characters, they're basically the equivalent of Echo Fighters, having the same basic moveset as their respective counterparts, but with unique stories and super moves. Kinda reminds me of Clay Fighter 2 Judgment Clay, where each fighter faced a unique boss which was a counterpart of themselves. There were some key changes to the gameplay as well, starting with a significant change to one button in particular. The guard button was replaced with a movement button used for sidestepping and dashing. This meant that blocking was returned to the old 2D standard of holding backward on the stick. Also, the playfield extended indefinitely, meaning that ring-outs were no longer possible. In fact, the gameplay as a whole seemed to shift toward a middle ground between 3D fighters and 2D fighters. Unlike the original Star Gladiator, whose super moves largely revolved around combo strings, Plasma Sword included the time-honored tradition of the super meter. The meter could store up to 3 stocks, which could be used for various techniques. The first and most obvious use for the super meter was each character's Plasma Strike super moves. The plasma combos of the first game still existed, but the Plasma Final was no longer a part of that system. Each Plasma Strike cost a full stock of super meter to use and would often make for good combo finishers. The Plasma Reverses, both Reflect and Revenge, now each cost half a bar to use. This way, they would be harder to abuse. Not that you'd want to abuse something that could potentially leave you open if you f***ed it up to begin with. Finally, the game added a brand new mechanic. This game's version of what's become referred to as the install. You can thank Garxus and Guilty Gear for that terminology. As for Plasma Sword, this mechanic is referred to as the Plasma Field. Each character has a unique one. Well, half of them do anyway. Their mirror counterparts have an identical version. For the cost of 1 stock of meter, your character generates a spherical field around them, and if it makes clean contact with the opponent, you're pulled into a pocket dimension where your character gains unique powers for the duration of the effect. From mundane effects such as extended weapon range or increased speed, to more unique ones like stopping time or changing size, to bonkers ones like whack-a-mole. Wait, hold on. A pocket dimension where the user gains special abilities. Why does that sound familiar? Just can't put my finger on it. Maybe if I take some time to expand my domain of knowledge, I'll figure it out. Anyways, this time, earning your character's true ending depends on your ability points. If you score high enough, you'll face one extra opponent at the end of arcade mode and reach your character's true ending. Otherwise, your ending will be abridged. Now, as opposed to the original Star Gladiator's more positive reviews, Plasma Sword received quite a mixed reception from critics, particularly for its Dreamcast port. Its gameplay was given good marks, but critics weren't sold on it due to a lack of originality. And being a game originally developed on PS1 adjacent hardware didn't do it any favors in the graphics department for a Dreamcast game. Actually, that bit worked against it in terms of success, especially given the timing of its release. By the time the Dreamcast version of Plasma Sword made it into stores, another 3D weapons-based fighter had already been out for a few months. The game in question was a little-known, super niche title called Soul Calibur. Yeah, against a title that would become one of the highest-rated fighters in history, Plasma Sword honestly had no chance. But if you know the internet, you know that even some of the most obscure games will find a way into the eyes of a community. And with the help of such platforms as Fightcade, Plasma Sword would develop a relatively small but dedicated community who have brought it to in-person tournaments to this day. It just goes to show you that just because a game gets buried by the past doesn't mean it's not worth digging up. Put it in front of the right people and any game can get its chance to shine. It feels like the FGC has truly come to appreciate this game as time has passed, and that makes me thankful. Honestly, that's probably the best thing I can say about both Star Gladiator games. Both great games that were severely overshadowed in their time thanks to the release of more famous titles, and both games that the fighting game community has warmed up to over time. While they could never reach the heights of the 3D fighting game juggernauts, at least Capcom has given them at least some recognition. Hayato was part of the roster in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and June became a playable unit in Project Cross Zone 2 as she pursued Hayato's evil counterpart, Black Hayato. And now that Capcom Fighting Collection 2 is available to the new generation, more people can understand how Plasma Sword became a cult classic. So yeah, Star Gladiator may have had a few rough edges, but for being Capcom's first foray into 3D fighting, they managed to make something worth checking out. And not being tied to the legacy of Star Wars was probably for the better.
Meanwhile, Masters of Terra's Kazi ended up clunky, sluggish, and slow as molasses. LucasArts really wanted to make a Star Wars fighting game on their own, but it's clear that they didn't have a handle on things. Who'd have thought that Star Wars at home would be better than the actual Star Wars fighting game, am I right? I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
Okay, we got a big party coming up, so we gotta make sure everything is ready. Do we have enough snacks? We need to make sure to have a good supply. Not to mention a hearty supply of drinks. Also, let's make sure the decorations are gonna arrive in time. We can't party hardy if we don't look the part. Oh, and have we contacted the DJ? What's the point if we don't have some good music? Finally, the most important element, the guest list. Next time, top 5 best and worst guest characters. It's game time! Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Blue Sky and Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon, and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.